Right, well, welcome to Brexit. Your questions answered. As we build up to that 11 o'clock moment this evening, the moment the UK does finally leave the European Union. And answering your questions this afternoon, we've got Georgina Wright from the Institute for Government. Welcome to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
No,
well, let's get straight into it. And we've got William van der Pooy, who's asking, will prices from supermarkets be affected by Brexit?
So that's a good question. When it comes to Brexit, not immediately, and that's because although the UK will no longer be a member of the EU, it will still be part of the single market and customs union. So trade flows between the UK and the EU and most countries around the world will proceed as normal. But it could change on the 1st of January 2021. How prices in supermarkets are affected will largely depend on the kind of trade agreement that the UK strikes with the EU, whether there are tariffs, whether importers need to pay more for their produce, and of course next year or this year you can't really sort of know if there's going to be any climate shocks or food shortages, and that could affect prices in supermarkets, but that won't be down to Brexit.
Okay, Titus de Boer is asking, how will Brexit affect holders of British overseas territory citizenship passports? Will they require visas to visit the European Union?
So to visit the EU, not this year, because again, although the UK will no longer be a member of the EU, it will still be part of the single market and customs union, so freedom of movement and all those rules still apply. What happens from the 1st of January 2021? Well, that largely depends on the outcome of the negotiation between the UK and the EU. It may be that British citizens are required to have a visa, even for short visits to the EU, but again, that's a matter for negotiation.
Sam Campbell wants to know, will Brexit have any substantive effect on trade with the United States of America? Well, of course, we want a trade deal with the United States of America.
Yeah, again, it depends. This year, we know the UK will still be part of the single market and customs union, so still needs to abide by EU rules. But again, everything depends what happens between the UK and the EU and what happens between the UK and the US. You've heard from US trade officials, but also from politicians saying, you have to be very careful about what you agree to with the EU because it could affect your chances in your trade agreement with us. So it depends, and we shall see. The government faces choices.
All right. David Morgan, can I still go to Ireland from Britain and not need a visa or passport?
You won't be needing a visa, and that's because you will be covered by the 1949 Ireland Act, and that says that British citizens residing or travelling to Ireland and vice versa do not need a visa. So that will be fine.
All right, that's easy. Nick, via email, will free movement continue after the transition period, or will we need visas?
Okay, excellent question again. Matter for negotiation. The UK and the EU haven't decided yet whether a visa would be required, and if a visa is required, for what kind of stay? Would it be a short-term stay? Will it be for business visits? Will it be for long-term stays? All of that's up for negotiation, and we'll see what happens this year.
Suhail Yusuf, will the quality of goods and services be reduced in trade deals?
Well, not necessarily. Again, it depends on the kind of agreement that the UK strikes with the EU, but also with countries around the world. It could be that the UK government says we don't want lower standards, but we're open to different standards. So, for example, if you look at the Americans, they say, well, actually our chlorinated chicken, our chicken is at the same standards as yours. It's just the way that we produce it, which is different. So it will depend on what the UK government is prepared to accept.
And of course, that is the great unanswered question, isn't it? What kind of agreement, what kind of deal is going to be negotiated in the next 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of that depends on what the government's ambition is. And of course, we know that this 11-month period is extremely short. We know that the EU has said, well, actually, it might be that a deal can be reached, but it's probably not going to be as comprehensive as we had hoped. So again, it really depends on what's in that deal and what they can agree to, and same whether the UK can strike some form of agreement with the US, especially given that any substantial trade agreement would have to be passed by Congress. And with an upcoming presidential election, that might not be the right time.
Right. Last question for you. Diana Burgess says, I've been given settled status, but without any document to prove this, will I experience difficulties in, say, convincing the NHS that I'm eligible for free treatment?
So when you apply for settled status, the government issues you a code, and you can basically take that code when you're applying for a job or when you go to the hospital. If you don't have that code, then you should just go on the government website. And in fact, I think the government's just issued more advice on settled status this week. So I would urge anyone who is concerned by that to just look at the website.
Do you think there is still a degree of uncertainty amongst many people, EU citizens living in this country, about what the future does now hold?
Possibly, but then again, the government has put up lots of advice, and I think there are lots of questions also for British citizens residing in the EU and what happens after the transition period. But the government has, put out a campaign. There are, I think, over 2 million EU citizens who have now applied for settled status, and if they have any questions, then they should definitely visit the website.
All right, Georgina, many thanks indeed for answering our viewers' questions. That's Georgina Wright there from the Institute for Government.